Welcome to part 2 of the first tier of our alien encounter, incident, and abductions iceberg. Now don't worry if you didn't see the last video, they're not in any particular order, so you can always go back and watch those later. And sorry this might take a little longer than I expected, but don't worry, I'll go ahead and compile them all into a longer video once they're all done. So for now, let's go ahead and jump into the next 3 encounters on this berg. The Pascagoula Abduction. Today we start out with the Pascagoula Abduction out in Mississippi. This is the tale of 2 men that saw something one night that they just would never be able to explain over the course of their entire lives. Full of horror and disbelief, this story has gone on to make UFO researchers and skeptics argue even to this day. On October 11th, 1973, 2 men down in Mississippi, Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson, decided to go fishing on the bank of the Pascagoula River near the Ingalls shipyard. Not long after arriving and setting down, the 2 men then suddenly heard an ear-piercing sound. Looking behind them, they saw a large object hovering in the sky. Conscious but paralyzed is how Hickson and Parker described themselves while in this terrifying situation. They claim that it was then that 3 strange beings picked up the men and brought them aboard the UFO. The alien beings then examined them, and after about 30 minutes they returned them back to the Pascagoula River where they had originated. The craft then took off and was gone as the 2 slowly pulled themselves together. After a short debate with each other, they decided they needed to report this to somebody immediately. Parker and Hickson, unsure of what to do, drove to the nearby Keesler Air Force Base. The military, though, wasn't interested in what they had to say and directed them to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Once there, they told the officers that they had heard whizzing sounds and saw 2 bright lights flashing out on the Pascagoula bank as they were fishing. 2 detectives, Diamond and Ryder, then sat down to have an interview with the clearly distraught men. Hickson, being more than willing to cooperate, answered as many questions as he could for the detectives. He would also go on to describe the beings he saw, which to him did not appear human. Hickson said, "And they glided me into that thing, you know, how they just guide somebody? All of us moved like we were floating through the air. When I got there, they had me, you know, they just kinda had me there." Hickson continued, saying, "They kept me in that position for a little while, then they'd raise me back up. No, it wasn't like no x-ray machine. There ain't no way to describe it." While in this paralyzed hovering state, Hickson claims to have been examined by something, saying, "It looked like an eye, like a big eye. It had some kind of attachment to it. It moved. It looked like a big eye, and it went all over my body, up and down, and then they left me." He would go on to describe the aliens he saw as around 5 feet tall. He also commented that they seemed to stand on just one leg-like limb with a foot that didn't have any toes. Hickson continued by saying he was so scared at the time he couldn't tell if the being itself had any eyes, but he did believe that it had ears, a mouth, and a nose. But he couldn't be completely sure though. He stated that none of these features looked human to him. His memory was also pretty spotty. He was unable to even remember leaving the craft. Detective Ryder would later state in an interview that at first he didn't believe their story, saying, "I wasn't really impressed with them. You have people trying to get notoriety, and I thought they were trying to get notoriety with a spaceship." However, while out of the room, Parker and Hickson had a chilling conversation recorded that would change Detective Ryder's mind. On a hidden recorder, the 2 abductees were heard talking about needing to see a doctor, feeling afraid, and their inability to sleep. Hickson said to Parker, "They had us. They could have done anything to us, but they didn't hurt me." The 2 detectives did note that they also seemed to just be talking to themselves at least part of this time. After this interview, Hickson and Parker would then go on to pass the polygraph test given to them by the Jacksonville PD. They even underwent hypnosis sessions, and were again questioned with investigators on record saying that the pair's story never even once changed. But despite all of this, many ridiculed and doubted the 2, with more than one Pascagoula resident skeptical. A local, Dwight Watkins, stated, "Do I believe they're just coming and picking up random people in the middle of the night? No, not really." Parker, unsure of what exactly happened, stayed silent and wouldn't talk publicly about his alien encounter until 2018. He then released a book, The Closest Encounter, and would go on to have interviews all describing this incident. In these interviews, he would recall the blue lights they had seen over the water, at first just thinking it was a police boat coming to tell them not to fish there. But as he looked up, he saw that the light was actually emanating from some sort of craft above the water. Parker said, "A big light came out of the clouds. It was a blinding light. It was hard to tell with the lights so bright, but it looked like it was shaped like a football. I would say, just estimating, it was about 80 foot. It made very little sound. It was just a hissing noise." Parker would also go on to describe the aliens themselves, saying that the creatures were legless and floated around inside of the craft. Seeing two of these beings, Parker stated that one had no neck and was gray and had wrinkled skin, while the other somehow appeared more feminine and also had a neck. Both of these creatures had mitten or claw-like hands, and one even wrapped its claw around his arm. At first he was terrified, but then was overcome with another feeling. Parker said, "I think they injected us with something to calm us down. I was kinda numb and went along with the program." He would go on to describe the same scene as Hickson. They both floated onto this craft where they were examined and then returned to the riverbank. The two men had a short debate in which they decided they needed to alert some authorities. While being interviewed at the sheriff's office back then, Parker mostly remained silent. He's regretted this decision, saying, "I was wishing I'd really open up to them and told them everything." Just recently, the recording from the interview with the Jacksonville PD resurfaced. Apparently, the officer that had leaked this recording had fielded about 50 phone calls from other people claiming to have seen something in the sky that very same day. Parker would later listen to this recording, stating, "When I sat down and listened to it, it hit me how real it all was. It kinda choked me up a little bit." Hickson and Parker stuck to their story for their entire lives, never once wavering. In September 2011, Charles Hickson would pass away from a heart attack. In June 2019, a historical marker would be placed on the site of the abduction. On it, a plaque detailing the events that happened to the two. Parker said, "It's emotional for me. I can't really describe it because I would break out into tears if I do. I wish when I died, I could be buried right here under this plaque. That would explain it the best. It is quite an honor." Parker, after a long struggle with kidney cancer, passed away on August 24th, 2023. The Kelly-Hopkinsville Encounter. This story begins on the night of August 21st, 1955, after an entire extended family pulled up to the Hopkinsville police station in southwestern Kentucky. Terrified and out of breath, they would go on to describe the most unbelievable alien incident, which would become one of the most detailed close encounters on record. With the close proximity to alien beings and the length of the encounter, it would quickly become regional and national news. Out in rural Kelly, Kentucky, just 8 miles south of Hopkinsville, this alleged encounter would take place at the Sutton's farmhouse. This 3-bedroom house was completely unpainted, had no running water, no phone, no TV, no radio. Elmer Sutton was here at the house he grew up in, visiting his 3 younger half-siblings and his mother. Planning to stay the whole weekend, he had also brought his wife, Vera, and friends, June Taylor and Billy Ray Taylor. Elmer's brother, JC, and his wife, Helene, would also make an appearance that night, along with a family friend known as Opie. They went on to enjoy each other's company and all ate a large dinner that was made by the mother and matriarch of the family, Glennie Langford. Soon after dinner, Billy Ray was thirsty, and since they didn't have running water, he went out to the well in the backyard to fetch some. This was when he saw some strange object. Billy said it was, quote, "real bright with an exhaust all colors of the rainbow." He later stated that it came silently towards the house, passed over it, stopped in the air, and then dropped straight to the ground. Understandably, this terrified Billy, and he ran back inside to tell the family what he had just seen. Not taking him seriously, everybody else just laughed it off and went back to what they were doing. That was until an hour later when their dog started to bark at the back door and wouldn't calm down. Elmer and Billy got up to investigate and made their way over to the dog. They looked out the window. That's when the two say they saw a strange glow with some humanoid creature standing in the middle of it. This creature was about 3.5 feet tall and had, quote, "oversized heads, almost perfectly round. Its arms extended almost to the ground. Its hands had talons, and its oversized eyes glowed with a yellowish light," said Elmer. He would continue by saying that the body gave off an eerie shimmer in the light of the new moon, as if it was made of silver metal. The two men were terrified. One grabbed a .22 rifle and the other a 20-gauge shotgun. They opened the back door and shot at the, as they say, little men. The alien then approached the door and seemed to raise its hands almost like it knew it was at gunpoint. Then this creature did some sort of flip and disappeared into the darkness of the yard. Soon after the first of the creatures fled from the men, another creature was seen peering at them through a side window. The window was open, so they fired right through the screens at this small intruder. Seemingly impervious to bullets, they said that the little man did another flip and disappeared from their sight. Miss Langford would later say, "I went out in the hallway and crouched down next to Billy when I saw one approaching the door. It looked like a 5-gallon gasoline can with a head on top and small legs. It was shimmering bright metal like on my refrigerator." Billy then stepped outside to investigate the yard when a claw-like hand reached down and touched his hair. The entire group witnessed this happen and pulled Billy back inside. Elmer went out in the yard and started firing at the creatures on the overhang. He then noticed another in a tree and shot at it as well. This creature just floated to the ground and then ran off into the woods. The Suttons and friends ran back inside where they turned off every light and waited. They would spend hours gathered there together listening for the beings, waiting to see if they would return. After a while, they all heard some sort of scratching sound from the roof. Unsure of what else to do, Elmer ran back outside and shot at the roof where the alien creature had been. Again, seemingly unhurt by any of the bullets, the creature simply floated down to the ground and ran off into the woods. He would later say in his own words that it was clear that those goblins couldn't be deterred by any ordinary farm family. Elmer and Billy went out back together to observe the yard while JC waited inside with a gun, protecting the rest of the family. They came to see one of these little men perched on a branch above them. They fired at it, and once again this creature just floated off, unharmed. They saw another floating away and shot at it as well. They said it sounded like their bullets were hitting metal. Seeing that the guns had no effect, the men ran back inside and regrouped with the others. Deciding that shooting at these little men was getting them nowhere, they formed a plan to make an escape. When the coast was clear and no more creatures could be seen nearby, the entire extended family ran out to their trucks. They drove as fast as they could, making their way to the Hopkinsville police station, arriving around 11 p.m. Police Chief Russell Greenwell listened to their story, later telling investigators, quote, "These aren't the kind of people who normally run to the police for help. What they do is reach for their guns. Yet here they were, women and children, hysterical, and one man with a pulse of 140 beats per minute." Hopkinsville Police, Christian County Sheriff deputies, state police, and military police from the local Fort Campbell all then followed the Suttons and friends back to their farmhouse. They performed an investigation, but didn't find that much. They would find the shell casings from the guns and some holes in the window screens, but that was all the evidence they would come across. They also couldn't find any proof that they had been drinking heavily that night, with Miss Langford stating liquor was not allowed in the farmhouse. The Sutton story would receive a lot of attention in the following days, with radio stations and even the New York Times doing a report on this alien encounter. Hundreds of curious people began to drive out to this rural farm in hopes of their own encounter, which the Suttons were not too happy about. They started by posting no trespassing signs all over their property, but this didn't help in the slightest. After this, the family started charging admissions, information, and picture fees, only then to be labeled as fortune seekers by skeptics. Nowadays, the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter is regarded as one of the most significant and well-documented cases by many UFO researchers. But skeptics say that this could have all just been due to group hysteria and excitement after witnessing natural occurrences like a meteor shower and a bunch of hoot owls. While not normally aggressive, hoot owls can be dangerous while defending their nests. It's also been suggested that the moonlight's reflection off the owl's feathers could have been producing that metal-like appearance. Many skeptics have their own theories, but so far no new information has come forth about this case. We might just never know who or what the Suttons saw that terrifying night. This encounter has since been published in many books and was even featured on a History Channel show called Project Blue Book. It has even inspired the Little Green Men Days, an annual celebration in Kelly Station Park out in Kentucky. This event is a carnival and a festival, all with people in alien costumes, listening to music and shopping at vendor stands, all while celebrating the Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter. The Travis Walton Incident. On November 5th, 1975, a forestry worker, Travis Walton, was out with 6 of his co-workers in the mountains of Arizona. Travis was working in the Sitgreaves National Forest as part of the logging crew, and it seemed just like any other day. After a long day of hard work, the 7 men got in the vehicle and started to drive home for the day. This is when they claimed to have seen a brilliant glow between the trees. They kept driving, but soon realized this light was coming from some large disc in the sky. Even before the truck could come completely to a stop, Travis jumped out and made his way over to this craft that was silently hovering in the clearing. He would describe this craft as hovering about 20 feet off the ground, shining a metallic gold color, being about 20 feet in diameter and 10 feet in thickness. Walton, investigating the UFO, was quickly hit by the vibrant bluish-green light that emitted from the bottom of the craft. This light beam sent him flying back several feet and then lifted him into the air. The co-workers said that this light had the look of a long blue flame, but was as bright as lightning and it lit up the entire forest. The crew boss and the driver of the truck, Mike Rogers, panicked and just drove away with the rest in tow. However, within minutes, their co-workers convinced Rogers to turn his truck around and they went back to search the area for Travis. The crew looked around for a while, but to everybody's surprise, Travis was gone. He had just vanished. With no evidence of him leaving the site, they had little to go on, so they decided to drive back to town and contact the local sheriff's department. There they explained the series of events the best they could, and in an effort to prove them wrong, the sheriff agreed to follow them back up the mountain. The sheriff performed a search but didn't find all that much. He then asked the men to come back to Turkey Springs for questioning. Rogers and 2 other crew members complied, but 3 others refused and drove the work truck back home. On November 7th, a search party of around 50 people searched the area, and although the police suspected foul play, there were no signs of any altercation. After a few hours of searching, Travis's mother told authorities, quote, "I don't think there's any use of us looking any farther. He's not around here. I don't think he's on this earth." This came as a surprise to law enforcement, with Sheriff Gillespie then dismissing the volunteer searchers. During these days, Mike Rogers, along with the rest of his crew, would be accused of murder with no other explanation for the disappearance. But all of Travis Walton's co-workers kept to their stories, and according to them, Travis jumped out of the truck, went towards the craft, was struck by a beam of light, and then vanished from the area. Then on November 10th, the largest search in Arizona history came to an end when the Walton family finally received a phone call from Travis, who was just miles away at a local gas station. Travis claims to have woken up face down on the side of the road just after midnight with a metallic mirror-like craft flying away from him. When he pulled himself together, he went to find help and ended up at the gas station using a phone booth outside. His family then came to get him, and they stated that he looked very dehydrated, was in the same outfit, and had 5 days worth of beard growth. Dwayne, Travis's brother, wanting to know more, took him to see Dr. Lestred Stewart, a hypnotherapist. Stewart immediately noted that Travis seemed very confused and had small lesions on the inside of one of his elbows. This led him to think that Travis may have been a drug addict, something the doctor had seen and treated before. The doctor stated that Travis wasn't ready for hypnotic regression and needed some bed rest. After some recovery, Travis would go on to see a Dr. James Harder, another hypnotherapist. Joining them would be 3 physicians and a psychiatrist, all curious to see if he would uncover any lost memories while under hypnosis. Travis would go on to describe what happened that night. When the craft hit him with the beam, he felt a numbing shock, and shortly after, he passed out. He awoke to 3 human-like beings standing over him in what he said to be a very odd-shaped room. While he was laying flat on some table, some device was placed over his chest. He became terrified and grabbed a nearby object to defend himself with. Jumping out of bed, he threatened these creatures. He described them as having enlarged head and eyes, pale skin, were around 4 or 5 feet tall, and wore some sort of orange jumpsuit. With these creatures not moving towards Travis, he began to investigate the inside of the craft. He ended up in a room that looked to him like a planetarium, with 2 beings then approaching him and then teleporting him to a different room. Travis believes that he was transported out of a scout ship and was taken aboard a larger craft. He then remembers the humanoids placing a mask over his face, which caused him to once again pass out. Walton believes that the light beam killed him when it hit him. He thinks this was unintentional, and the beings decided to bring him aboard and revive him before placing him back into the street 5 days later. After these hypnotic sessions, Travis even passed a polygraph, with doctors stating that no drugs were found in his system. On November 15th, Travis was interviewed again, this time by a freelance polygraph examiner, Jack McCarthy, who was working with a UFO group in Inquirer magazine. McCarthy, however, wasn't so convinced. He claims that Travis seemed to be holding his breath in an attempt to beat the machine. The doctor that examined Travis Walton made a statement saying that if he was simply lost in the Arizona woods, he likely would have froze to death. The temperature in the area had been a bitter cold 8 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 13 degrees Celsius. Later, while discussing this case, Dr. Harder said, "Beyond any reasonable doubt, the evidence is as valid as any that would be accepted in an American criminal court." Later, during an interview, Dwayne would reveal that he, his brother Travis, and their mother were all UFO buffs. They had even discussed with each other that the opportunity came up to board an alien object, they would immediately get directly under the craft. This was because the chance was too great to pass up. Dwayne even insisted multiple times that, quote, "Travis was not even missing. He knows where he's at, and I know where he's at." A few months after all of this, UFO researcher and author Raymond E. Fowler proposed the theory that this had all been a hoax. He suggests that this was all a practical joke performed by Travis and half of the crew, which makes sense seeing as 3 of the crew members refused to cooperate and answer questions, likely knowing that they were being mocked by their other co-workers. The whole Walton family apparently had a reputation for pulling practical jokes, with one neighbor claiming to be the target of multiple pranks over the years. On October 20th, just a little while before this whole event, the NBC network aired a made-for-TV movie special about an alien abduction titled The UFO Incident. This would actually be all about Betty and Barney Hill case, which I covered in the previous video, but essentially, it's another alien abduction story, in which the two would undergo hypnotic regression and uncover memories of their time on board an alien craft. Many skeptics argue that this story is what inspired Walton and Rogers to enact their own abduction event. Skeptics even claim that at the time, with a little imagination and claims of alien abduction, you could claim instant celebrity status, and one of these instant celebrities was Travis Walton. To this day, the Travis Walton incident is one of the most well-documented UFO cases involving alien abductions, but Travis himself still gets a lot of criticism from skeptics. These days, he spends his time writing, sharing his story, and going to UFO events around the country. In 1993, he wrote a book about his abduction, which was later turned into a movie under the same name, Fire in the Sky. Travis has appeared in numerous TV shows and podcasts, even having a documentary made about him, called Travis, The Travis Walton Story. Now he's even sponsoring his own UFO conference in Arizona called the Skyfire Summit. Thanks again for watching, guys, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you liked this video. Let me know what you guys think of this story and recommend some other ones down in the comments for me to cover in later videos. The last part of Tier 1 will come out here in a week or two, so be sure to come back and check it out. And thanks again to Reddit user Amoles260 for making this iceberg image. This was Matt, and I want to believe.